Hey, it's Art from My New Microphone. In this video, let's have a discussion about which processor should come first in the inserts of a track, EQ or compression. EQ and compression are perhaps the two most important processes when it comes to mixing. If we think about mixing as being all about balance, we can look at EQ as frequency-dependent balance and compression as automatic balance control relative to the levels of the signals. With both of these processes being so important in mixing, it's only natural that the question of which should come first in the inserts of a track should come up. So in my opinion, if there were any resonances or low-end noise in a signal that could cause a compressor to trigger unmusically, I would go ahead and filter those resonances or low-end noise out of the signal before the compressor with EQ. Some compressors even include a high-pass filter in their sidechain signal path for this very reason. That is to eliminate low-end rumble that could cause the compressor to react unmusically. So in these instances, I would certainly put an EQ before a compressor in the order of inserts on a track. However, beyond this, it's largely up to taste. But with that, let's discuss the general differences between putting an EQ before a compressor or a compressor before an EQ. EQing a signal before compression allows us to be a little bit more aggressive with our EQ moves, knowing that the compressor will help to smooth out the track in the end. As I just alluded to, it can also be good to be able to control what the compressor sees by EQing the signal before sending it to a compressor. We should, of course, be aware of the important characteristic frequencies of whatever track we are EQing and how these EQ moves will affect the overall tone and balance of that track in the mix even before compression. In general, using EQ before compression will yield a smoother and warmer result. Compressing a signal before EQ gives us less control over what the compressor sees and reacts to. However, it gives us more control over the tonal balance of the track. Note that we may want to be a little bit more subtle with our EQ moves in this situation, as the compressor will have already smoothed the audio out. In general, EQ after compression yields sharper, cleaner results. However, it's often not an either-or situation when it comes to mixing with EQ and compression. Due to the versatility and popularity of these processes, it's often the case that there will be multiple EQs and multiple compressors in any given signal chain within the mix, starting from the track through the instrument buses and finally to the mix bus. It could be, and often is the case, that EQ could be used before and after compression, or vice versa. Again, these signal chains include all of the inserts on an individual track and whatever buses that track runs through before reaching the mix bus in the mix session. So I know that that was brief. Words don't really do the best job of describing the differences between EQ before or after compression, so let's now hop into our digital audio workstation and listen for ourselves to hear the differences. All right, here we are inside of Logic Pro to discuss EQ before compression or compression before EQ. And what I wanted to do for this example is to look at a vocal that has a bit of plosive energy coming through and what we can do to solve that to begin with before hopping into EQ before compression or compression before EQ. So let's have a listen to the vocal by itself right now.
Ooh, she glides in my head. Waking question, should it even be said how?
So just in that beginning part, you see that it's rather dynamic and we have quite a bit of plosive energy there, especially at the second half of it. So let's bring in our channel EQ and our compressor. I'll just be using the stock ones from Logic for this lesson here on YouTube. And let's start by addressing those plosives. So right here, I will loop just the second half as there are more plosives in this section. And what we'll do is we'll look at EQ, but then we'll also look at this sidechain option right here in the compressor. So first, let's start with EQ just to address those plosives.
Waking question, should it even be said?
So you see there's a lot of low-end energy down here when the plosives are there. So let's bring up a high-pass filter to try to eliminate those plosives as much as possible.
Waking question, should it even be said? Waking question, should it even be said?
We'll A/B test.
Waking question, should it even be said? Waking question, should it even be?
So that took care of a lot of that plosive overload of the mic and will save us some grief when it comes time to mixing the low end of this song. Now, of course, we would want to get rid of this plosive energy in nearly all cases within the mix. However, if it was still here, we could also go to the sidechain right here turn on this filter, go to a high pass filter, and adjust the frequency here so that the plosive energy would not trigger the compressor. That way we can have the compressor before the EQ in the chain without having that plosive energy causing the compressor to compress the signal unnecessarily or unmusically. So for this example, we'll see here that we have 155 hertz right here. I'll just bring this into 155 as well. I'll go a low Q of 0.71. And this is in high pass. And I'll just keep this high pass filter engaged on the sidechain signal of the compressor that is acting upon this vocal for the rest of this training. That way, again, when we are switching between having the compressor before the EQ or after the EQ, the low end plosive energy will not trigger the compressor regardless. Now let's go through a little bit of processing here with EQ and compression of this vocal in solo. Of course, I don't typically recommend mixing in solo, as we want this vocal to sit very well in the mix rather than sound really great just on its own. But for the purposes of just showing EQ before and after compression, we'll go ahead and start in solo before listening to the vocal back in the entirety of the mix. So if we move this over, we see that right now, currently we have the EQ in line before the compressor. So let's go ahead and make some EQ moves here to help bring out the vocal.
Ooh, she glides in my head. Waking question, should it even be said how I feel? Is it real? Read and wrote a work of fiction. Ooh, she glides.
And we'll move on to a little bit of compression.
Waking question, should it even be said how
Turn this
I
auto gain
feel? Is it real?
A/B test.
Read and wrote a work of fiction. Ooh, she glides in my head. Waking question, should it even be said how I feel? Is it real? Read and wrote a work of fiction.
Now this is probably going to be a case where I'll use serial compression, as the dynamics are a little bit too wide in this already, and I don't want to rely on just a single compressor to control all of the dynamics of the signal. So in a case like this, I would generally opt to use two compressors, a first one to get the big peaks down, and then a second one to help level out more of the audio without overloading either of the compressors in the chain. All right, so what we'll do now is we will loop this first half of the verse and listen to what it sounds like when EQ is before compression or when EQ is after compression in the inserts. So these are going to disappear as I move these around here in the inserts of the vocal. So what we'll have to do is use our ears and listen to the subtle differences between having compression before or after EQ. So we'll start with EQ before compression, and here we go.
Ooh, she glides in my head. Waking question, should it even be said? Ooh,
Compression before EQ.
she glides in my head. Waking question, should it even be said? Ooh, she glides in my head. Waking question, should it even be said?
So the differences are very subtle, to say the least. Of course, we're not going too heavy-handed on the EQ or the compressor in this example, but I just wanted to show you the small differences between having EQ before compression or compression before EQ. When the EQ is before, we tend to get a slightly gentler or warmer sound, and when the EQ is after the compressor, we can get a little bit of a sharper and cleaner sound, as we can then adjust the frequency-dependent amplitude of the track after the smoothing effect of the compressor here. So again, it's subtle, but I wanted to show you here, and especially I wanted to show you the high-pass filter to get rid of the plosives, particularly on vocals, either in the EQ when we are going before compression, or if we are having compression first, to opt to use a sidechain high-pass filter when possible. All right, let's hop out of Logic Pro. All right, so now you know a little bit more about EQ and compression and which should come first or last in your mixes. If you found this video informative, I would invite you to hit that like button. And I've also put together a free resource that I think you might be interested in called the My New Microphone Mixing Cheat Sheet. Of course, there are no cheat codes in mixing as every mix is different. However, this cheat sheet or reference guide will help walk you through the step-by-steps of mixing and give you ideas about how to make the right mixing decisions at the right time in your mixes. So once again, there's a link to that in the description box down below if you are interested in checking that out. And if you would like to see more videos on the My New Microphone YouTube channel, I would invite you to subscribe to the channel and also to check out my top 11 EQ tips here and my top 11 compression tips right here. So click on one of these and I will see you in the next video.